But everybody, first off, Laura, thank you for being on the podcast. I appreciate this.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me on.
And everybody who doesn't know, I was on Laura's podcast. What was the name of your podcast, by the way?
Emotionally Available.
Emotionally Available. Yes. If you haven't checked out my episode with her, it was released a couple of weeks ago. And funny story, when I first went on the dating world circuit, I bought a shirt that said emotionally unavailable. And it had a picture of Spock because Vulcans have no emotion. And they go, hey, this is where I'm at. This is the truth.
And that's the best you can do, right? Admitting that and saying, this is where I'm at.
Yeah, total honesty is the best I can do. So tell everybody a little bit about you and what you do for a living and I guess your mission in life.
Yeah, so I'm a dating and relationship therapist. I'm based in New York City, but I'm currently traveling through South America. So I'm doing all my sessions remotely. I work with clients primarily in their 20s and 30s, a lot of dating, relationships, sex, emotional intimacy, emotional availability, all that good stuff that seem to be big buzzwords on social media nowadays. Aside from that, I have my own podcast. I'm pretty active on Instagram, on my therapy Instagram. That's about it.
Awesome. And again, I'm glad you're on because I want to ask you a few questions. We have a few topics I want to touch on. And one of them is a viral video that I had that's currently at 2 million views. And it has to do with folding towels. And I want to get your insight on this. So the video, I more or less was explaining how a man gives up on effort at the house when it's romantic or doing anything in the house. And from my own personal experience, and not just myself, but from millions of other men, from what I've seen in the comments, some of us go to a home and, let's just say, for example, we love our wives with all our heart. We got married. We want to be forever. And, we want to give her the world to make her happy. There are some men, including myself, who experienced when it came to household chores, it was either her way or get out of the room. Like the moment I was cooking something in the house, cooking something in the kitchen. No, you messed it up. Just get out. I'll do it. I'm like, well, this is the way my mom taught me how to cook it. Just get out. No, I can't trust you. I'll make it myself. Oh, you just made so much work for me. Or if I mop the floor, she goes, no, you used the wrong pine sol. I'm like, no, I didn't. It smells fine. It's clean. So in other words, there's a lot of men out there who are in environments where their spouses are just constantly on them and just attacking them. And the towel conversation came about, where I've got into many fights as well as many other men out there where we folded the towels and we put them away. They're clean. It's done. It's out of the way. They're not on the floor. But yet, in my particular video, the ex-wife came home and I did the entire house. My share that I was obligated to do every week, of course, and hers, because I didn't want her to have any stress. But out of the 10 things that I did, she didn't point out the 9 that were flawless. She pointed out the one, which was the towels. And I remember at that point saying, I give up. Everything I do, I can never do it right. You're always yelling at me. It's done. The towels are going to be dirty anyway. In a week, you'll get a chance to do them yourself again. So what is the big deal? So for men out there who are married, and women, of course, as well, in those type of relationships, where does that stem from, where somebody has to have that type of control?
I love that you brought up the topic of control, because that's exactly what it is, right? And so that brings me back to, why do we attempt to control things in the first place? And it's because of anxiety, right? They're all anxiety-based behaviors. Attempting to control something so trivial like folding towels is an attempt to regulate the nervous system, because when things feel out of place, the nervous system becomes dysregulated, right?
Oh, okay. So you're saying maybe, let me dive into that. So you're saying maybe it's more of there's something else going on. It's not just the towels, or they're just high strung because of other things that haven't been spoken to yet.
The towels are the placeholder.
Oh, okay. Well,
there are so many things going on in that moment, right? So let's unpack the context for a second.
Okay.
If there is a husband, not saying that you are this husband, but if there is a husband who isn't often helping out around the house, and then they do one thing, like fold the towels, and then they fold the towels, quote unquote, incorrectly, because they're not up to the standards that the wife typically prefers the towels to be folded, then that one thing that they did is no longer valuable, because nothing else is being done at any point, right? So it's easier to see, oh, you folded the towels incorrectly, because nothing else is being done correctly at the same time, right? There are so many different factors. Let's say you're in a relationship where you do help out around the house often, right? But the towels are folded incorrectly and the wife flips out. That to me then is a clear cut. The towels are a placeholder. I'm using that as a way to get out some of my emotions, right? I'm trying to control because of my anxiety, because my nervous system's dysregulated, and I don't necessarily know how to regulate my nervous system myself. So I'm going to project that onto you.
Ooh, okay. So for those, so in most, I guess, everyone's situation is different. So it's tough to really speak in generalizations because everybody's different, right? So just for the sake of the conversation, in some cases, it may not even be the spouse, let's just say husband or wife, that's triggering this. It's just something that they're dealing with internally, right?
Yep.
Okay, so how would they, for that person who's listening, what solutions would you give them or advice because maybe they feel guilty or they're unaware that they're doing this to their spouse? What advice would you give them on maybe getting that controlled?
Work on ways to regulate your nervous system. I mean, everyone, it's February, so we're 1 month into the year. Everyone sets all of these amazing resolutions to get a promotion, to get more in shape, to do all of these great things. And while those are incredible and there's something that we should strive towards, if you don't have a regulated nervous system, nothing else that you achieve means anything. Right? So we need to learn how to regulate our nervous systems so that we could be more present in our day-to-day lives. Otherwise, that promotion means nothing. You're going to get the promotion, take on more work, and then melt down because you don't know how to regulate. Right?
Okay.
And so bringing that back to how do we regulate the nervous system? I mean, the great thing about social media is there is so much information out there now about how to bring yourself back to center. Right? Regulation is just bringing yourself to the present moment. It's not going down those thought spirals about, well, he folded the towels incorrectly, and now I have to clean the house, and now I have to do all of these other things, and I have to take every single towel out, fold it all back up again, put it in the closet, but now I also have to clean the closet because the closet's a mess because he knocked everything over when he put the towels in it. Right? That's not grounding in the present moment. And so I know those who are like, I think she's talking about me right now are probably saying, but it's true, he did knock everything over in the closet. And I do have to do all of that, right? But that's not the present moment. The present moment is your husband did something for you. What do we do when someone does something for us? We say thank you, right?
Thank you,
we
babe.
Teach very small children that at such a young age. And somehow as we get older, we start to lose all of that.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that because I totally agree. In the comments, the last I checked, there was like over 16,000 comments, and I was really shocked because, you hear those podcasts with men saying that women don't take accountability, which I don't think is accurate whatsoever. But there were a good percentage, I'd say 40 to 30% of women in that thread saying, oh, my God, thank you for letting me know how I'm treating my husband. I need to work on myself. So I was like, whoa, OK, so this is happening more often than we think. And there's a lot of men. Yep, my wife was like that. That's why I left her. And then the conversation kind of steered what weaponized incompetence. And I know you know what that is. And for those who don't know what it is and who are listening, it's more or less a term that originated in the workplace area. And we've all been at work where there's one person who's, I don't know how to do it. You do it better than me. You go ahead and do it. And then you have to take the responsibility of whatever the Excel sheet was. And then so that's where the term adopted from. But now there is this term in the feminists and the advice conversations on TikTok where weaponizing comment. There's a lot of men out there, and I'm pretty sure there is. I'm not saying they don't exist, but there's a lot of men out there who are just plain ignorant and just saying, you know what, I'm not even, I'm going to pretend not to know what I'm doing. Therefore, I can kind of get out of it. So that situation I'm not speaking to because, again, any man who's doing that. Well, first off, in your conversations with young couples, have you spoken to maybe men or women who are doing that? And maybe why are they? Like, where does that stem from?
I think it's a lot of learned behavior, right? It goes back to what did we observe in the household? And I mean, even women flipping out on their husbands for folding the towels wrong, that's probably a learned behavior as well. Yes. They probably saw mom yell at dad when dad didn't do something right. And that's just the dynamic of the household. So I do want to definitely detach some of that shame and some of that blame from women who are doing this because you learned that behavior from somewhere. We don't just pick up behaviors on our own, right? We learn it from things that we see. And so it's not your fault that you're doing this, right? You now have the power to make a different choice, right? And go a different direction. But I think in terms of like weaponized incompetence, right? Weaponized ignorance, I think that goes back to traditional gender roles. I think a lot of men feel that they don't necessarily need to contribute to the household. And so
Mm-hmm.
they'll take the lazy way out and maybe half-ass it. And maybe if I keep half-assing it, you're not going to ask me to do it anymore. And I don't know if this happens at a conscious level. I think it's all happening at the subconscious level.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessarily something that I'm talking about in session in terms of weaponized incompetence. We're definitely talking about things like sharing the mental load, sharing the physical load, right? We're creating chore charts like we're in fifth grade classrooms all over again.
Yeah.
And we're normalizing the fact that we need to start communicating, because if we're not, the wife is the one who's doing it all. And so I don't know if we're
And that's
talking
unfair.
about incompetence, because that brings a whole other layer and that gets really sticky in session, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to name it. So unless my clients bring it up, I'm not naming that.
Gotcha. And, a part of that could be also cultural, because I think I mentioned in a previous podcast, and I think our last conversation is that, I'm Hispanic, and I was brought up in there's women's work and then there's men's work. And, my dad taught me everything about the outside, landscaping, fixing drywall. So that was more or less what I was brought up to learn, while I never did dishes. I never washed clothes. I didn't clean the house. That was the inside work, right? And I remember growing up thinking, you know what, I get that, but I don't think I want to be part of that continuation. It's unfair that I saw my mother just tired. My dad would come home and just demand his steak, and she was weary. I go, there's no way I'm going to put my wife through that when I get married. So again, when I got married.
How old were you when you started thinking this?
14.
Wow.
13.
Good for you.
Yeah. And again, I love my parents. My dad just passed away and they were married, 43 years. But again, they come from a different generation, a totally different generation that we have no concept of. But seeing that, I just chose not to adopt that. And I bring this up all the time. I'll never forget Thanksgiving dinner. I got up and started picking up the plates, and my grandma looked at me like I just confessed I murdered somebody, like I brought shame to the family. And I'm like, no, I got this. I'm taking the dishes. I'm going to wash them because I love washing dishes. So again, where's my point? I'm rambling about this. My point is culturally, maybe it's culturally like, because I do know there's some Latina mothers who baby their sons. And they don't want him to pick up anything. He's got to, he's going to work, and I knew a few of these mothers. My mijo's going to work the rest of his life and break his back for his woman. I'm going to take care of him while he's a baby and while he's a teenager, while he's in this house. So maybe that's part of it too. Not just Hispanic cultures, but other cultures out there.
Absolutely. I think parenting and I think culture definitely plays such a huge role in all of these factors, right? And the fact that at 14 years old, you were cognizant enough noticing, okay, these things are going on in the household. This is not necessarily how I want to be when I'm older. That's incredible, because I don't think those shifts in mindset happen that young. And I often don't think they happen at all when it's so culturally ingrained. I think it's really, really, really hard. It's, in my experience working with clients, it's usually an external force like a wife or a spouse or a younger family member who starts that mindset shift, right? It doesn't happen just through observation. It's usually triggered through conversations with other people. It's triggered through conversations about other relationships, right? Things like that are external are starting to plant the seeds for that new way of thinking.
Okay. The other piece that I've had this discussion before on TikTok, and I remember I almost got canceled by a few people about the fold. It's just amazing the power of towels and how that just is just I guess the icing of the cake. There's so many layers to it.
Oh, gosh,
I did some research last year, and I want to get your opinion on this. Again, I believe a lot of it is, my mom treated my dad this way, so I'm going to do the same thing. I've seen that. But do you think being a perfectionist in itself can be one of the culprits of maybe having that eye and just that you did it wrong, et cetera, et cetera?
I think definitely, but I also think we need to start unpacking the word and the term perfectionist, right? It's just a nice cookie cutter way of saying anxiety. Right. Anxiety. I have very high functioning anxiety. Right. That's what perfectionism is. Everything needs to be perfect. Everything needs to be in order because I have anxiety, and it stems from this belief that I'm not good enough. right? So I need to make everything perfect to prove to others that I am good enough. And
Mm-hmm.
so in those moments right now, the husband folds the towels wrong, and all of a sudden your core belief of I'm not good enough is triggered. We have come so far away from the actual root of the issue that it's so clear the towels are the placeholder. Because if the perfectionist is being triggered by how towels are folded,
Right.
and that's coming back to the core belief of I'm not good enough, there is so much internal work that needs to be done. Leave the husband and the towels alone, right?
Okay. Let's go on anxiety. I want to touch on that real quick because believe it or
Yeah.
not, I didn't know of the word until
Yep.
after my divorce. And then that's when I started noticing I was just very high strung and just on edge, constantly doing this and worrying about what I
Yeah.
needed to do and what I haven't done. But I wasn't like that until after the divorce. And maybe it was I
Yeah.
had everything on my shoulders now. I don't know what it was. Since you said you talk to mainly a lot of couples and people in their 20s and 30s, I want to kind of talk about that generation. Are you seeing an increase, I guess, reports or ratings, or that's the wrong word. Are you seeing an increase in everyone having anxiety in this younger generation?
I think we're born with
You think
anxiety
so?
at this
Because
point.
because I'll be honest, I
Oh my
didn't have that. I,
goodness.
I truthfully can say 100% that I got nervous and maybe I called it stressed out, but I didn't have that lingering feeling. You can't, sometimes you
Right.
can't shake the anxiety off.
Right.
And now I have it and I have my coping mechanics to handle that. But for the young folks, you think, I'm sorry, you think we're born with it. I'm sorry.
I'm also curious, though, we can circle back to that in a second, but I'm
Okay.
curious as well, right? Because the way anxiety presents in our life starts to change based on the different stages of life we are in.
Makes
And so
sense.
I'm curious, you probably had anxiety prior to the divorce, right? I'm thinking about all the effort that it took to try to sustain and repair the relationship that led up to the divorce, right?
Hmm.
That's not something that you could just like skate by without any anxiety. There were probably some emotions there that weren't necessarily all out in the open.
Uh-huh.
And I'm curious if maybe the work that you were doing to put into the relationship just consumed your thought patterns, right? To the point that maybe you weren't even noticing signs of anxiety that you were showing. Because we typically don't just like develop anxiety randomly
Hmm.
or later in life. We typically have anxiety our whole life.
Hmm. That's a good question. I don't know. I
Yeah.
remember, like I said, I would stress out. I had my, I play guitar, I did whatever just to kind of relax. But the level of intensity that I felt of the
Yeah.
anxiety were, it
It's
affected my
different.
behavior. I don't want to say crippling, but it got really bad after the divorce. And
Yeah.
again, maybe it's because I put too much pressure on myself because now it's all on me to do
Yep.
everything. So maybe that's what it was. But I've noticed that that's still present in my life, and it's gotten easier with meditation, and you have to
Yep.
have an outlet, right? You have to work out, you have to
Yep.
do something, do
And think
podcasts.
also, right? Like you putting so much pressure on yourself and then the divorce happening. Okay, well, what does that say about me that the divorce is now finalized? Right. After
Yeah.
putting in so much effort. And so those control based behaviors, right? Folding the towels the right way, their attempts to regain that control, AKA just regulation, right? It's not actually regulation, it's just control. So
Hmm.
that in this moment, I feel regulated.
Hmm.
We also feel regulated when we're actively working towards something, right? Think about a really
Ooh.
stressful day. If you have calls back to back to back, you have 8 hours of calls, you have 100 million tasks to do on your to-do list, that oftentimes feels less stressful than an entire to-do list with 0 calls at work because you're not actively like working towards something, right? You're checking off all the
Ah.
calls that you're doing at work and one call goes after another and another. And the productivity on that jam-packed day is usually higher than it is on the day that you don't have a lot of calls because it's harder to actually see what you're working towards. So
Uh-huh.
it feels a bit more regulating to have your agenda filled than to not, right? That's why all of our very anxious people back up their weekends from Friday to Sunday evening. They have a million different things to do because
Yeah.
that feels more regulating, though exhausting, than just kind of lounging around and going with the flow.
Could there also be maybe an innate fear of not wanting to be alone and be alone with
Oh,
your
yeah.
thoughts?
Oh, yeah. I feel like we should probably circle back to being born with anxiety, though.
Yeah.
Just thinking about this generation, right? And a lot of the pressures that we grew up from parenting norms and things like that. Also, a major shift in societal culture from our parents' generation to our generation, and now the younger generations that are being raised. There's so much drastic change across the generations, socially, culturally, that it can be very dysregulating to see. But we also are growing up in a different generation. Well, not me. I was still born way back when. But the younger generations now, right, are growing up with immediate access to screens. Their brains are bouncing back and forth. They're using iPads very functionally. They know exactly what they need to do before the age of like 3 on iPads. So they're just surrounded by so much more sensory input than, for example, I was when I just like fell off my bike in the cul-de-sac.
Yeah. Like I did. Yeah. No computers, no nothing. We're outside playing with bugs or doing whatever. Yeah.
Right.
So there's more stimuli.
Think about that, if we think about that, the younger millennials started getting these screens. They got computers maybe when they were teenagers, right? They had phones and computers all through college. And this is the generation that has the most anxiety of all that I'm working with.
Wow.
The Gen Zs are now like, well, we were born with this, so we've got to figure it out eventually. And they've developed unconsciously internal ways of coping, right? Sometimes I see Gen Zs just like bouncing around in their chair and they're always constantly moving. That's the body's way of regulating itself.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess let me ask you this, because we mentioned, different generations and how they handle that. And Gen Z, you say there's like a coping mechanic in how they handle anxiety. So let me bring up marriage. In your conversations with people in 20s and their 30s, I am seeing on TikTok and with my audience that there's a huge audience of people just not even considering marriage anymore. They don't want to go into that space. I think I have an idea on why they're doing that, but what are your observations with your conversations?
I'm seeing both. Psychology Today is like a big umbrella organization. It's the Google for therapists. If you want a therapist, you go on Psychology Today.
Okay.
And they also have blogs and things like that. And they put out an article a few months ago called The Rise in Single Men. And it was all about how a lot of women in these cis-het couples are raising their expectations and their standards for these relationships. Mm-hmm. And so they're not dating. Right? Mm-hmm. They're not tolerating the bare minimum anymore. They're not pursuing to marriage. And I think that is honestly so incredible. It's such a great shift to be able to take a step back and say, you know what? This is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I'm going to wait until I find that person who wants to grow with me, who wants to actually build a healthy relationship together.
I'm like the choir right now. I'm like, my hands are in the air if you don't see everybody. It's like, I 100% agree with that, because again, I've shared many times that when I got married at 21, I did it because I thought I was doing something that my parents wanted. It's like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And everyone else is getting married, so I might as well, because I don't want to be left out. And now that I'm engaged with my love witch, who that's my nickname for her.
I love that.
my love witch. It's the first time I'm ever doing something for me. Like, this feels right. This feels like what I've always wanted and what I've looked for. So I'm doing it for the first time for me. And I love the fact that there's a lot of young people that I preach all the time. Just because your friend's getting married, or your parents are maybe pressuring you, because again, in the Hispanic culture, I'm sure there's other cultures out there. But at 20, I remember my mom and other family members, when are you going to make your mom a grandmother? I want to be a grandmother at 20.
Oh, yeah.
Who tells their kids that? I don't know. Maybe when the life expectancy was 35 back in the olden days, I don't know. But I would never tell my daughter that. And I've never pressured that on them. And I'm glad, like, she's 19. She goes, Dad, I don't know if I want to get married. I just want to work on me. I'm like, good. Focus on you.
Okay, you're 19 and there are things to work on. Love the self-awareness. Love the self-awareness. I just shared a reel today on my story, and it was one of the most miraculous things. I think when we talked on my podcast, we had said, I told you about how my next relationship, I'm not going to date someone unless I feel comfortable with them raising my kids, right? I don't have kids right now, but foreshadowing to my future family, if I'm not comfortable leaving them home alone, if I'm not comfortable with them having a weekend away with dad, right? I'm not going to marry you. I'm not even going to date you, because I'm just wasting my time waiting for the potential for you to grow into this father figure that I want for my kids. Today, I saw another reel, and it was about thinking about this man as your son, would you be proud of your son as he is today? And I immediately thought of my exes and was like, oh no, I would not be proud if I were their mother.
Yeah.
Right? And it's so true. Are we having these same expectations for ourselves and for our partners as we are for our children and how they're going to treat women?
That's an amazing point. And I'm glad you brought that up. You said, when you're dating somebody, how would you see him raising your kids? That's a great point.
Yeah.
What other questions do you think young people should be asking themselves before falling in love and this is the one? What other questions do you think you should look at?
How do I feel when I'm around this person? And not what are your emotions? How does your body feel? Right? Because we think our emotions are things like love and happiness and sadness, and they are, but your emotions are actually in the body, right? So we intellectualize our emotions and attach a label to them in our brain. So you really need to check in with your body. If you're noticing when you're with this person that your heart is beating really fast after 2 weeks and it hasn't started to slow down, that's a red flag, right? If you're noticing that you're constantly gripping your hands or you're like bouncing your feet around, right? You're fidgeting a lot, that's anxiety, right? So we need to start tapping into, how does my body feel? How does my mind feel? Do my thought patterns start to spiral into some negativity? And then how do I feel when they're gone, right? We've left the date. How do I feel now? Do I feel like, am I never going to hear from them again? I don't know where I stand. Why aren't we dating yet? Or do you feel like, wow, that was such a great date. I can't wait until I see them next.
That is a great point, because I'm guilty of this when I was dating, that I was so just consumed with somebody that as if they didn't respond, I'm checking their social media posts, where they're checking in, what photos they liked.
When was the last time they were
who are they
online?
talking to?
Yeah.
That's a great point. Valid point. Let's say they do start talking. What are the questions you think they should ask? I've always said that you want to see them at their worst. Like, how do they handle stress? Because we both know that life is not easy. There's going to be some obstacles, and how do you handle that? So I'm always preaching that. See them at their worst, because if they're yelling at you, just blaming you, or just imploding, that's a red flag. If they're just calm and all right, let's get to a solution. We got this, babe. And they go like in T mode or leader mode. That's who you want. So what are the questions? Let's say they're serious. They're 6 months in. They're thinking engagement. What are the questions you think they should even bring up before even thinking about getting engaged?
We're thinking about engagement at 6 months in.
A year. Let's say a year. Sometimes, 3 months in. Oh, I knew 2 weeks in that she was the one, and we've been married 13, 14 years. Like, wow. And I always ask, would you want your kids to do that? And they go, no. Well, there you go.
I say that, and it sounds like there's so much judgment there. I really don't have judgment towards people who get engaged quickly. I'm such an impulsive person, and I move through things very quickly, but I make sure that I hit every stage and really am doing a lot of that self-reflective work while I'm moving very quickly. And so I could see myself being someone who gets engaged after a year of being with someone, but that's after a year of deep self-reflective work, of deep conversations with this person about what kind of relationship are we building? What kind of marriage do we want? What kind of kids do we want, right? Really building that family structure before we're just kind of throwing ourselves into it. And so back to your original question, right? I think you asked, what are some other questions to check in with as you're starting to think about engagement? Think about, have I had a conversation with this person about their core values? Right? What do they want most in life? I mean, we talked on my podcast about someone I had just started seeing, and he comes on Saturday, and I'm so excited to see him. But one of the first questions he asked me as we were really getting to know each other, and I swear I think this was the moment I realized I liked him, was, what would you say and what would you do if your kid comes to you someday and says, I don't think I want to go to college? And that was such a core value and like parenting laced question. And as a therapist, I mean, I loved it, obviously. It allowed my brain all the gears started turning. And I would say, okay, let's take a year off then when you graduate. But you're not just going to like take a year off and do nothing, right? Let's pick up a new hobby. Let's maybe explore a trade. Let's take some classes in a creative field, right? You're going to do something. You're not just going to like sit home, and you're not just going to go travel the world for a year. If you want to go travel the world, that's fine. But like, let's be actively working towards something while we're going to travel the world. And so that to me was just so interesting, because not a lot of couples are having these core values conversations. And I really think you need to sit down and ask yourself, do I align with their core values? And do they align with my core values? Do we share the same expectations for the future, right? Not surface level things like, what kind of house do we want? What kind of town do we want to live in, right? But general lifestyle questions. If you imagine yourself raising private school kids and they imagine themselves living in an urban city public school, right? Those values maybe don't align. And so we need to start having deeper conversations about that before we're waiting for a ring.
Yeah. And also discipline.
Yes.
Disciplining the kids. How do you talk? Or some parents like spank? I don't know if spanking's allowed no more, but I grew up spanked. But things like that. How to talk to the kids and things like that.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
In that case, right, you said you want to see them at their worst. I want to see them at the end of a very stressful week.
Yes.
Right? How are they regulating themselves? Maybe how are they communicating and interacting with pets? How are they interacting with other children, right? You want to see them in these situations where they have to really step up and be an authority figure for themselves or for others.
Okay. That's a great one. And I'm going to take us to our next topic here. And that is going to be passport bros. Are you familiar with what the passport bros are and that whole movement?
Oh, I'm aware.
Okay. In your conversations, what have you, I have a definition here, and it's funny, you Google, what are the passport bros? Google hasn't given us a definitive definition, but in your conversations with, the younger generations who are implementing this, what is your take on that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so from my understanding, passport bros is this wave. I don't want to call them a movement because I don't want to ingrain this and internalize it as a movement, but it's this wave of American men who are leaving the country to find wives who fit more traditional domestic housewife kind of roles within the family system.
Right. And they're doing this. And again, I have a video on TikTok that's also at 100K views, or me and this other
also
creator
probably almost got canceled.
Yeah, well, I can handle the guys. The guys don't report the videos. It's the angry the women that do that. It's weird. I'm being honest. I see the reports.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's guys. You can piss them off all you want, and they'll like call you names and move on. But whenever it's a female topic like the weaponized incompetence, those are when I get banned, and then I have to appeal it. I didn't say anything wrong.
Wow.
6 times I've been banned.
I wonder if that's because women aren't as likely to speak up. They're more likely to take covert action.
Maybe.
Because when we speak up, it's met with resistance. So I'm curious if that plays a role into that. Very interesting.
Possibly. But yeah, the passport bros, again, they're going out to other countries, and I Googled it. I did a lot of research on this, by the way. Brazil, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand are the countries they're going to meet traditional women. And in that video that I just mentioned, me and this other creator took a portion of our conversation, because there are men out there who are truthfully, you know what, I want to just experience other cultures. And the American dollar can really stretch a lot in these other countries. You can live like a king with like $50,000 a year. You can live like a king in some of these countries, right?
That's what I'm doing now.
See, exactly. So they're taking and that's, if I was younger with no kids, I think I would do that as well. Okay, why not, right? So I understand that piece, but there's other men out there that are saying that Western women have become too modernized, and toxic feminism has ruined women here. There's no options, and hence I'm going to other countries where they appreciate traditional values. I can kind of understand that, but the video that got a lot of men angry was me and this guy saying, in the U.S., as multicultural as we are, you're telling me the U.S. couldn't give you a woman, so you're just using this as an option to leave? Come on, dude. Take some accountability. You probably had a horrible dating life. Work on you, is what the advice was, and that triggered a lot of these men. So that's more or less the basis of the passport bros. But what are your thoughts on that, where young men are thinking that Western women are ruined? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So I, every Wednesday, do a coffee Q's where I allow my audience to ask me questions and I answer them. And someone said, I just broke up with my boyfriend and I feel like I'm never going to find anyone else. And so I actually posted a video, and this sounds so messed up, but it was funny. I posted a video of the population count tracker just ticking up, 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 up. It was at like 1.8 billion. And I said, homegirl, you're going to find another boyfriend. It's okay.
Yeah.
And it's the same for these men, right? I just Googled it. There's 167 million women in the United States.
Yeah.
And if you're telling me that you're only finding these toxic women, if you can't find a woman that fits your core values and the type of lifestyle that you want, then you are the problem,
Exactly.
right? It's not women, it's you.
I 100% agree, because there's a lot of men that I've coached. I have a good friend of mine who lives in DC. He's got a great job. He takes care of himself, and he found a traditional woman. She's comes from a strict Italian family, but she lives in DC. She manages an art museum, and she's a beautiful singer. He met her at church. She was singing some gospel hymns, and he's like, "Oh my God, who is she?" He said the lights came down from the church, and she just lit up. And I have to meet her. And now they're engaged, but she's a traditional woman. So I think the point of that story is, I think if you're a good person with good energy and you have a healthy mindset and soul, you're going to attract that. If you're just bitter and angry and just hate the world, that's all you're going to see the world as, and that's all you're going to attract.
I also think there's a big issue in what these passport bros are looking for.
Yes.
Right? This man who met his wife at church clearly respects her, because he's saying like, oh my gosh, I have to meet that woman. She looks amazing. How beautiful is her singing, right? And so I love that you brought up the Italian culture, because I also saw this reel from an Italian man. And while I loathed the end of it, because he said, passport bros, I hear you. I get it. I understand it. I'm like, okay, you were doing so well up until the last 10 seconds. Right. But he was talking about Italian culture, and my family's very culturally Italian. I get the Italian American side, right? But I also lived in Italy as well. So I know the Italian culture very well. And there is so much respect for women in the Italian culture. He described in the video that if you look at like the mafia, right, the woman of the household is the mob boss. Like, that's her. The man is just the facade, right? The man just kind of steps in, shows face as the authority figure. If mom speaks, everyone else is quiet, right? And if someone does something and mom chimes in, that's it. It's done. And it works because that's ingrained in the culture, and it's a respect kind of foundation, right? The wife doesn't need to go beg for all of this attention and this acknowledgement of all that she's doing, because she's respected within the family system, right? Women in America are not respected by men. Sorry, we're not. And so we have to do things like beg for our needs to be met. We have to do things like beg for flowers on Valentine's Day. An Italian man would not dream of coming home without flowers for his wife on their anniversary, right? He knows that if he walks through that door and there is not a flower in his hand, he's sleeping on the streets that night, right? It's culturally, respect is ingrained within the culture. And I love that you brought up Brazil, because I'm thinking about an American man, right? These passport bros going to Brazil. A Latina woman is going to eat you alive when she realizes you are not respecting her.
Yeah. And
eat you alive.
Yes. Absolutely.
She is going to chew you up and spit you out. Come on.
Yeah. And again, like I said, if you're going for the culture and just kind of just expanding your boundaries and just seeing other people, I get that. But if you're going with the mindset like we just touched on, where like the West is ruined women, I can't, women suck here, and I'm going to another country to find them, that's where I have a big problem with it. But to each their own. But in the comments, I found it interesting, because a lot of them were triggered and just yelling at me and insulting me, calling me a simp. I'm like, whatever. But I go, question, what are you looking for? You said traditional woman. What are you looking for? And this one guy goes, purity. And I'm like, oh, so you're the type that, doesn't sleep with anybody until you're married. No, I'm not talking about me. I'm like, oh, so this is biased. She has to be pure and you can do whatever you want. He goes, of course. I'm like, oh, okay, you're a piece of crap. Okay, so I don't align with that either. You don't respect women. Yeah, you don't respect women. And a lot of them are seeing that, hey, one of them was an engineer. He was an asshole, from what I can tell in his comments, but he made a lot of money. But he felt his money was the key to, like, hey, she wants me because of my money, and look at the life I can give her. So I'm giving them an opportunity to get out of this poverty. I don't even know if these countries are poverty ridden. I'm not going to say that, but from their mindset, they think they're saving them. And in that, and with that exchange, transactional relationship, she is devoted to him. And I guess that's what they're looking for, someone devoted and pure, which that is not my mindset. I can't even speak to that, why a guy would think that.
And that's not the culture, right? Those are not the women you are going to find. Right. You are going to find women who want mutual respect. And will they have more household roles and appear from the outside a bit more traditional? Yes, because that's part of the culture. But so is respect, right? Yes. So if respect is not occurring, that's abuse. That's an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So these men are just openly announcing to the internet, I'm looking for an abusive relationship, right? I want to take advantage of my women. And what a lot of people aren't talking about is that financial abuse is abuse, right? If you're the breadwinner, if you're the only one bringing in money and you know that, and you're using that to your advantage to keep a woman around you, that's abuse.
Wow, that's a great point. I mean, of course, it's right there in front of me. I just didn't think about that. That's an excellent point. And it's funny because there's another piece I wanted to bring up. There's also men that made comments in this field that are passport bros that said, yeah, I just went to Thailand and got laid every day for 3 weeks in a row. I'm like, oh, so you're going for sex? I thought you were going for traditional women. And they go, no. So it's like, I guess like any group, there's the group that I understand why they're traveling. Like, just like you said, you're traveling because, for economic reasons.
Cost
that makes sense.
Cheaper, and I get to travel and experience new cultures.
That makes total sense. But for the guys going for under the cover, like I want a traditional woman when you really just want to go out and get laid, that's where I have a problem with that. And that's where I'm like, no, I don't agree with that whatsoever. And a lot of these guys, you know how old they are? They're under 25. Ugh. It's like, what experience do you have, man? I mean, come on. Zero. It's like,
your brain doesn't fully develop until 26, and men again, are usually a little delayed, right?
Oh, yeah.
Women develop faster than men, statistically speaking. We know that. There's so much research to support that, right? Yeah. And so not only is your brain not developed, but you're also probably like delayed 2 years behind that.
I 100% agree. I'll send you the interview that I saw this on. This kid was 23, and the one person on the news interviewing him was like, and that's when he lost me. 23, you haven't experienced anything, boy. Like, what's wrong with you? That's not even, and you know, it's like
the rose-colored glasses are still on.
Yeah, and not only that, it also kind of brings back to, I guess, the social media. If you're 23 and you have that actual mindset that women, in his words, ain't shit, American women are ruined. At 23, there's no way in hell that you develop that with your own personal life experience. You learn that through your phone is what happened. And I think there's a huge generation, also especially family. These young men and family. Exactly. And I think a lot of young men are just being raised by these influencers and just giving them this horrible advice. Because who the hell thinks that way at 23? You haven't even probably traveled outside your city yet to meet other women.
I also want to bring in some family context to this, right? If we think about the family systems that they're growing up in, they're not growing up in a super open, communicative, and loving and
they're not.
I don't know, open-minded household, right? They're probably growing up in these very restricted, very conservative households. And so now these beliefs are fitting with belief systems in which they were raised, right? But it's being taken to a significant extreme. Yeah. And so we think about what are some of these common beliefs, and I'm going to generalize for a moment, right? It's immigration, not good. America only, right? America first. And now here are these men who are aligning with a lot of the belief systems of these very conservative groups in the US, but they're not wanting to now bring women into the country. And that's okay because it fits their agenda, right? It fits what they want. It fits their power, their manipulation, their control tactics. But when people want to come themselves to have a better life for them, for their family, that's not okay, right? Immigration is bad. And so it's just
Great point.
I want to just make it make sense.
Yes.
If you want to be fucked up and control women and be abusive, go off, do it. Yeah. But say that, right? Like say that so that at least women know, okay, I'm going to avoid you.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Just own it.
Please own it. And, I'm going to share a quick story before we go on our last topic because I live in San Antonio. So the idea of men getting engaged or going to Mexico to find a beautiful young woman who's going to cook and clean for you is not a new idea. It's been around forever, right? You know, I think culturally, white men who were in the military, you know, did the same thing. So it's nothing new. It's just now this is being exposed on social media. So anyway, the con to this is I've heard many stories from my dad and seen it firsthand with cousins is where they go, I'm gonna go find a woman who's loyal. They go, right? And they're the ones that end up getting conned because they bring the woman, but not only that, they bring her parents. And before you know it, it's her siblings. So now you have her entire family after 10 years living in your house, and they're not even speaking English, they're speaking Spanish. They've adopted that. And then she left him 10, 12 years after the fact, after she brought her entire family in and got settled and got an education. So there are some cons out there. So you have to be careful that a lot of guys got used. So
which is why I'm saying own it, because there are people who are going to own you too.
Exactly.
Right? They're going to take advantage of you right back. Let those women find you so they can come to this country if that's what they want to do.
And again, is it really that they get conned? Did they get conned, or is that just the game? Because they both knew what they were doing.
You're both playing it.
Yeah. So there are some bad sides to that. And again, it's happened all the time down here. This is a great conversation. I'm all live.
Oh my gosh. So I could go on for days about that. I'm trying to connect the dots, right? Dropping into my body, right? We talked about how do we regulate our nervous system. My head is like scrambled eggs right now, just trying to connect the dots between all these things, these boys, I'm not even going to call them men, right? Are doing.
And you know what? That's a great point. I forgot to mention. In those videos that they're triggered and just yelling at me, I did a response video and I go, I can tell a lot of you didn't play sports and weren't coached up or didn't have your dad yell at you, because there are many times me growing up as a Gen Xer, I don't know if parents do it now, but even to my son now who's 16, I get on him sometimes like, hey, don't be a dumbass, dude. What the fuck you doing? You know, do this way. But I love him, right? I'm giving him constructive criticism, but I'm hard on him. And he doesn't get defensive. So I'm thinking, I remember asking a few of them, did you have a father figure in your life? And a lot of them said no. So they don't know how to handle that confrontation. And I'm like, I think, speaking of family, to your point again, I think maybe that's another contributing factor on them seeking out these male influencers as male role models to be.
Andrew Tate.
That's a horrible, that guy's like, I have opinions about him. He's just a horrible person. I go, you're not listening to this guy. He goes, why would I? He sounds like an idiot. I'm like, good. I'll tell my son that. So,
Oh, thank goodness you talked to him about that, because so many parents would see it and just pretend like it's not happening and say, oh, my son's not watching that. Right. I'm glad you said something.
Yeah, because my daughter in high school, she came home one day and she was pissed. I'm like, what happened? She goes, there's these guys who follow Andrew Tate. You know him, Dad? I'm like, of course, I'm on TikTok. She goes, they're calling women dogs. And they were playing this video that Andrew Tate had, like women should be as loyal as dogs. So women are on the same level as dogs. And she got pissed at them and started yelling at them. And they had a confrontation. I'm like, I'm good. I'm glad you yelled at them.
These are the passport bros.
Yep. But again, it's funny because generations, I think a lot of people itself will hear the soundbite, but not the message. And they'll run with that. And I think that's why I have conversations with my son. And we talk about everything, sex, everything. All the advice I talk about on TikTok, I talked with him. So I just want him to get the right information, not just what these people are saying online.
Yeah. And not even just get the right information, right? Get information and form an opinion about it.
Great point.
That's all we can ask.
You're absolutely right.
Make sure if you're consuming this Andrew Tate bullshit, make sure you're forming an opinion about it, right? Yeah. So you're not just like absorbing it and rolling with it, right? Make sure you're actively thinking to yourself, how does this make me feel? Right? How does this make me think about the women in my life, right? My mom, right? My bonus mom, my sister. How does that make me feel about these women in my life?
Form an opinion. I think a lot of people don't do that anymore. Yep. A lot of people. One of the lessons my dad taught me as a Gen Xer, he's like, be a leader, not a follower. You know, do that. And I never understood it, but as I got older, I understood it's like, make up your own mind. You know, don't follow the masses. So I wish more people did that.
Yeah, and there are so many things within that messaging too, right? I the one thing I don't love about that is that we live in so many binaries, right?
Yes.
Live in the gray area for once in your life. You don't need to be a leader all the time. You don't need to be a follower all the time, right? Just flow back and forth. Do what feels right. You can have a choice to be both based on whether or not it feels good for you, right? If you're making an active choice, then that means you're checking in with yourself and noticing, how does this feel for me? And that to me is more important, right, than always stepping up, always being a leader, not being a follower or being a follower, right? Just check in with you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And the last topic here, I wanted to talk to you about this is because this is also trending on TikTok. Leonardo DiCaprio, we all love him. He's a great actor. I think Wolf of Wall Street is one of my favorite movies, but he is making news right now because he's got a new girlfriend and she's 19 years old, which is insane. What are your thoughts on this whole dynamic? I guess not necessarily with Leo and his relationship of older men dating women so young.
I mean, to talk about Leo for a moment, I feel like the only thing he's in the news for anymore is for the women he's dating, which is really concerning.
It's like a running joke. Yeah.
Yeah, he has this pattern of dating women who are under 25. And to me, that screams why. Right? Okay. Why is he only dating women who are under 25? And there will be plenty of men who say, like, their bodies, they're younger, they're more active. Okay, fine. If you're doing it for the physical aspects and you're shallow, go for it. But the thing that I'm concerned about with these men who are dating younger women is their brains are not fully developed, right? Bringing it back to what we talked about earlier. And so they are easier to manipulate. Right? Think about your daughter. I think you said she's what, 14?
19.
19. Where did I get 14 from? She's 19, right? And so think about how she views the world. Think about some of the decisions she makes, right? She makes them like a 19-year-old. Right. I don't doubt she's intelligent. I don't doubt she has such a good head on her shoulders, but I'm sure she does some things and you're like, what the heck are you, why are
and
you
she's
doing
19.
That? Right. Like, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And then you think about college, right? Okay, 20, 21, you're ending late college years, right? Like, the decisions that people make in that stage of their life are so immature. They might work sometimes, right? But they're not made from a perspective of like actual logic, right? They're just, this feels good right now and I'm just going to do this, right? And okay, I know I have to do these things for my own survival, but there's no additional nuanced context to it, right? They're not thinking 10 years into the future. They're thinking right here, right now, this is what I want to do. And that's what a lot of these women are thinking, or a lot of these women are thinking who are dating older men, and the men are taking advantage of that.
Well, and again, I did some research on that too, because Leo's not the first. There's Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis. There's even Seinfeld in the 90s. He did the same thing. They all dated younger women. Why? I don't understand it for me. And again, maybe it's because I have a daughter that age. I can't, my mind's not wired that way. But why is it men, with your research and education, what are your theory is on why men are just looking for somebody so young?
Honestly, I think it looks cool.
Really?
I know you wanted this like super
elaborate
thought
answer.
out, logical, educated, informed response. I think it impresses the 14-year-old selves who were bullied in middle school, who were bullied in high school. Right? I think they're trying to tap into something subconsciously and show face and put on these appearances so that others are impressed with them.
Yeah. That is, and I'm going to make a confession here because again, I'm engaged, so I'm talking about my dating past. So when I started dating, right, I found it to my pleasure, like, oh my God, younger women are attracted to older guys. I didn't know that, going in 2016. So the youngest I dated was 23. I couldn't fathom going younger than 21, right? Because that's just, she can't even drink. But I did it because I wanted to do it because, why not? But I remember dating younger women and them looking up to me as like, there's like maybe a father figure sort of role, like anything I said, I would hear often, wow, you're so smart. Wow, that makes sense. Wow. And then when you dated an older woman, they had their own opinions and they had their own mindset. And I remember that shock, like, oh my God, she's not agreeing with me. And I didn't get offended by that. It was just like a jolt to the system, like, oh my God, okay. But I can see how for some men, that impressionable young mind who looks up to you as like the man who has all the answers and knows everything can be like a huge ego boost for them. Yeah.
And it's also control, right? Subconsciously. Yes. I don't think men are as in tuned to these covert control tactics, right? Because men are usually the ones, historically speaking, who are in that higher power dynamic, right? And it's control to have a woman who's just constantly agreeable, right? It's control to be with a people pleaser and know they're a people pleaser and not challenge their people pleasing, right? Not encourage them to step up and take their own seat, their own opinions, right? That's control. And a lot of people just go along with it, knowing damn well what they're doing, right? Knowing damn well what's happening just to get something out of it.
And you think with Leo, it's control? We don't
know.
know his situation. We don't know his mind, right? But hypothetically, you think it's just control or just it looks cool?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, he's been such a famous actor for so long, and he didn't get an award for so many years. So there's probably a lot of insecurities that are playing out for him. I don't know if I can do a whole psychoanalysis on him. I'm sure it's probably both.
Yeah, probably.
Right. Because I also know there were some not so great allegations against him in past relationships and past sexual encounters. So, I mean, that tells me control and manipulation, right? But then I'm also thinking about insecurities, not winning the awards, right? Wanting to be cool. I'm sure it all plays into it.
Yeah, I believe so. And again, there's that argument go younger, bro, go younger. And I remember responding a few times, younger is not always better, man. Younger is not always better. The few that I dated, there's some maturity issues. You're totally different generations, and there's a lot of commonality that maybe can be present there. Like, you don't have a lot in common other than the physical attraction, but there's nothing else there. Your core values, as you mentioned earlier, are totally different because she's younger and you're older, so you're in two different worlds. So going younger is not always better. It depends, and it goes back to what you said, to how you feel, how they make you feel, and how you gel together. So so any guys listening, younger is not always better, man. I'm being serious.
And if you think it is, you ask yourself, do I even know what my core values are?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're dating these younger women who are in completely different stages of life, I'm not talking about the one-off, I met this person on a grocery line, right?
Yeah.
And we ended up falling in love. We had so much in common, and now we're 20 years apart and we're dating, right? That's a different story. You just happen to meet. You're not actively seeking out these younger women, right? I'm talking about the men who changed their age requirement on Hinge and Bumble to 19 or 18, right? Those men, ask yourself, what are my core values? What are my values within the context of a relationship, right? And I guarantee you're probably no idea.
Okay.
Which is why they're dating these women who are just so agreeable.
Yeah, exactly. And let me turn it around a little bit before we end. So on the female side, why is it, other than the obvious answer, daddy issues maybe, I don't even know if that's the obvious answer, but why do you think younger women, let's just say 19 to 25, are dating men in their 40s? I got different answers in my experience, but what do you think what are your thoughts on that?
I think they probably have something to offer that they're not getting, right? Monetary gain, status gain, something like that. I'm sure that's contributing to it. I think women in general date older because women develop faster. And so, for example, when I was, 23, my maximum age on Hinge, or my youngest age on Hinge, was 26. For a man, I did a 26 to 31 kind of range because I was having more intellectual conversations and I wanted to have more intellectual conversations with my partner. But the men that I was going on dates with at 23 were shotgunning beers on the street corner in between bars. And that was just not me. That was not what I was doing. So I dated older because these were men who would go out and have dinner with me and sit down and have these conversations about core values and their future and what they wanted. So those closer age gaps, right? The 3 to 10 years, I think that's common. I think that's just due to development. Anything beyond that, if you're actively and consistently seeking out that 20, 30-year age gap, I don't know, maybe it's a kink, maybe it's something that turns you on, maybe there's other kind of monetary gain from it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry, my dog is going crazy right now.
He's excited. Yeah, I can hear him.
She's yeah, older men, yeah.
I heard very comparable reasons. One told me I was very mature, well-spoken. We can talk about anything. I didn't like getting drunk. I still don't to this day. I'll drink, but I don't want to get, shit-faced, as they say.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, a lot of them weren't looking for monetary value or a money for me. All they wanted to do was come out to the house and just rest and just hang out and with no drama.
Yeah.
And I remember, oh my God, you have a headboard. I'm like, yeah, is that rare? And you got a bed stand.
The
I'm like,
headboard.
I got a
The
headboard. Yeah, I'm like, is
headboard.
that a big deal? I'm like, so it's like
Yeah.
little
I
things like
think
that.
that's really common with a lot of women as well coming out of college because they're so used to just dating conveniently in college with the frat boys and whoever
Yeah.
they're surrounded by in college. And they're so juvenile and immature.
Yeah.
And so if you're not finding your partner in college and then you're graduating, I think you're immediately starting to date a bit older because you don't resonate with any of those guys, right?
Yeah.
Had you resonated, you might have found a partner in college, but it's not. And they're choosing to wait. And now they're saying, I'm going to date a little bit older. So I find someone who does resonate.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Yeah, when we say it out loud like that. Well,
Yeah.
Laura, we're over at an hour right now. This was a wonderful conversation. I can't believe an hour went by. This could have went like 2 hours easily because there's so much more I want to talk to you about.
Every time.
Yeah, we need to do this again. But before we leave, again, tell the people where they can find you or your social media links and such.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. My Instagram is lauracaruso.therapy. I just started posting on TikTok. I think my 60-second therapy trends that seem to be blowing up. Everyone's loving them, which is really cool. I think those are going to live on TikTok, and that's just going to be the pure content of my TikTok. So you can find me, same name, Instagram, TikTok. I'm a relationship therapist and coach. So if you're looking to work with someone, I work in the state of New York for therapy clients, and then I work anywhere in the world for coaching clients. So you can just shoot me a DM on Instagram.
Well, awesome. Again, Laura, thank you for your time. This was an absolute blast. Okay.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.